Kate Mila-Falcha. Welcome to Irish Granny Tarot. It's time for our Saturday book. This is very exciting. We are doing Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2 by Linda Moulton Howe. If you haven't watched the videos on Volume 1, certainly go back and watch. But this does stand independently, so it's not entirely necessary. You'll be glad you did, though. Her books are great. And when we finished covering this book, we're going to do another book drawing for a free book. And anybody who has donated to our book fund will get their name in a hat, and I'll draw them and mail them a book. And our last big winner was Anne. Anne, I hope you got your book. I never did hear sent it off, so fingers crossed that you got it. Let's get right down to this because time. So this book was published in 1998, but it covers things over a wide range of times. And of course, written by Linda Moulton Howe. Volume 2 is called Strangeness. And the foreword is written by Colin Wilson, an author. And he said when he was asked to look at the book and do a foreword by Linda, he said he was really surprised at the legitimacy and the stature of the contributors to the book. Linda Moulton Howe was a scientific investigative journalist in, I think, somewhere in eastern Washington state, years and years ago in the 70s, and got drawn into all these topics that we're familiar with. Animal mutilation, UFO sightings, abduction, crop circles, these are all related. And she figured that out because she approached it as from a scientific method. And because of her stature, her respect as a science writer, she was able to discuss these things with I don't want to say legitimate, mainstream scientists. And I think they were all a little bit surprised, as Colin Wilson, the author of the foreword, was. And he concluded this: why and how how can they ignore all these incidents that happen? The reports are overwhelming. It's not one person, it's not 100 people, thousands of reports over the years of these weird occurrences. And he says if they're true, if even a fraction are true, then we're all asleep. Now, this was written in 98, and keep in mind that attitudes have expanded, broadened a little bit. Many more events have occurred. The nature of them has changed somewhat, and we will talk about that as we go along. But his conclusion is that there's a need for security that people naturally have, and we're not good at coping with anxiety, and we tend to bury our heads in the sand. We ignore what doesn't affect us directly. And taken individually, he said the cases in this book might be dismissed or minimized or ignored, but as a collective, he says the total picture, it really is overwhelming, especially some of the sources of documentation that she got. He says something very strange is apparently going on that can't be argued, and it's overwhelming how much circumstantial evidence and eyewitness accounts there are. And people think circumstantial evidence is somewhat derogatory, that circumstantial means less than. The vast majority of cases in court are litigated on the basis of circumstantial evidence. It's not less, it's just different. It's not necessarily physical scientific. It may not be DNA and it may not be blood, but plenty of cases have been successfully adjudicated based on timetables and proximity and eyewitness accounts. Logic. So he says little men in silver suits are these are the eyewitness accounts. Little men in silver suits that are beaming up animals in a beam of light, and that paralyze or freeze people in place who try to interfere, and often seen in the company of weird creatures like Bigfoot, Sasquatch type creatures. And he suspects that these scenarios are remembered and constructed intentionally, in other words, screen memories, to sound bizarre, to sound preposterous, to protect the experiencers from the reality of what they've gone through, to protect them psychologically, and to present such a bizarre story that no one's going to believe them. I mean, come on, little green men and Bigfoot landed in my field. You know what kind of reaction you're likely to get. Wilson suspects that these scenarios are remembered as a protective thing, and some of the stories in this book, he says, they read like science fiction. Yes, they do. He would usually view with critical skepticism all of this stuff, but he says too many respected academics, researchers, scientists, and authors have experienced these sorts of stories. He has trouble with backward time travel. He says, yeah, that's really weird. He says, until you realize that time has no real meaning. And he said eventually he came to sort of a resolution in his mind, even about time travel, which really blew his mind to begin with. But he agrees that it's possible now that he's had time to evaluate it, and he also accepts things like precognition. Then he asks the question, what about chaos theory? Well, what about it? What about chaos theory? He says he finds himself, like others, trying to construct a general theory for this huge mass of information to tie it all together. The modern narrative that we're familiar with, saucers, gray beings, abductions, that began around 1947 with Kenneth Arnold spotting the flying saucers. He was flying over one of the western mountains. I don't think it was Shasta. No, I think it was maybe Rainier. Well, in that chain of western mountains that connect California, Washington, Oregon, old volcanic, Mount St. Helens. This guy was flying around and saw flying saucers, and that was the first, official modern sighting. But as this author points out, that there are ancient tales and art of visitors from space. You just go back and look at cave drawings. Go back and look at the Prince Pacal in Mexico, Peru. Looks like ancient aliens. That's where the ancient alien astronauts came from. And there's the Foo Fighters, the balls of light, the globes that harassed aerial fighting in World War II. Then the 1961 story of the Hills, Barney and Betty Hill, who driving home from a vacation in Quebec and pulled over to look at something weird flying over a lake and ended up with this remarkable story of lost time. It's called Interrupted Journey, lost time, and medical exams, and being shown a star map. And later on, when they couldn't sleep and they were having nightmares and they were really having trouble, they went to a therapist, a hypnotherapist. Out came the story of alien encounter. People had a hard time believing it when it finally broke into the public. They tried to keep it secret. But interesting tidbit about that event, the star map that she was shown, she drew it in hypnosis, and everybody said, well, that doesn't make any sense at all. But there was an artist who did sculpting, and she decided to try to do a three-dimensional picture of it. And wouldn't you know, when she finished this three-dimensional constellation kind of map, they were able to identify that what Betty had seen was a constellation we're familiar with. It escapes me right now. Constellation we know very well from the back end, from outer space coming to Earth. Our view is from Earth going outward. Very interesting. Then there's all these reports of animal mutilations and alien abduction, and those never felt benign because of the terror they struck in people and animal mutilation, you know. And it wasn't just cattle. It was all sorts of farm animals, horses, sheep, cattle, goats, pets. Dozens and dozens of cats would disappear. We talked about that before. Then John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist who had a couple of patients that were sent to him because nobody knew what to do with them. They were talking about being abducted by Greys, and everybody else in the psychiatric world just thought that they were out of their minds. And he started taking them seriously. In 92, he had what he called alien discussions, and he went to an MIT conference, and by discussing these alien experiences of his patients, he was able to get attitudes to swing towards, well, maybe there's credibility. And he was interesting because he didn't stop there. He didn't say, okay, you know, I have proof that there are weird beings, physical beings from other planets. He got much more esoteric about it. We've done his book before. I'm not going to go into it here. Very interesting take on it. So it seems like with all these things, there's been a slow process of convincing people, desensitizing people, and this author predicts there's going to be big changes in this new millennia. This is 98 that he wrote this in, so he's talking about now. So let's ask Ross Coulthart from Australia, the guy who wrote the book In Plain Sight we just covered. So what? What are they doing? You know, what is this all about? Are we being hybridized? Are they experimenting on us? Are they trying to take over? His final conclusion is that there's something lacking in human consciousness, that our focus on our reality seems off. We're not understanding something really crucial about our existence, meaning the earth and everything on it, in relationship to the larger universe. We take our incredible evolution for granted. We just plod along, killing each other and the earth. And he says we've been looking at the world from a worm's eye view, and what we need is a bird's eye view. We aren't much more advanced than the cows that they found mutilated. And he compares us to ET intelligence. He says, when you compare us to ETs, we're equally as unintelligent as a cow. We have to change our intellect. We have to change our viewpoint. We have to change our awareness of our reality. He says, we have been hypnotized by material life into a kind of passivity. We need to wake up to other realities, wake up to other dimensions. And he said he woke up when he was researching a book that he was going to write about the occult. He said these events can't be ignored, that this book is like an alarm clock. Linda Howe's book is like an alarm clock. So that was his conclusion. And then we have the author's introduction. Let me find the page here. There's a quote at the beginning of the chapter. Recent decades have taught us that physics is a magic window. It shows us the illusion that lies behind reality and the reality that lies behind the illusion. Its scope is immensely greater than we once realized. We are no longer satisfied with insights only into particles or fields of forces or geometry or even space and time. Today we demand of physics some understanding of existence itself. This is John Wheeler, quantum physicist. And Linda Howe interviewed a colonel from an Air Force intelligence, and this guy said that he spent time. Now, I'm going to use the term ET for non-human intelligence, and I'm going to use the term UFO for unidentified aerial phenomena, just because it's more familiar. It rolls off my tongue easier. It'll make things go more smoothly for me. I won't have to hesitate and retranslate initials and things like that. So just set the groundwork there. So this Air Force intelligence officer was friends with a colonel who spent time with an ET that had been retrieved from a crashed UFO in New Mexico. And this colonel said that the being explained to the colonel telepathically that this is not the only universe. He said, quote, "Imagine a large island of white sand, and that each sand grain is a different universe separated from the others by an electromagnetic membrane, and surrounding the island is a cold, dark sea." And the colonel asks this intelligence officer what the dark sea was, and he said, "You don't want to know. It would change you forever." Darn it, I don't want to know. So Linda demanded to know, and he just refused because he said, national security, I can't talk. So she has active and retired military and intelligence operatives who talk to her. They want to remain anonymous, or for personal safety reasons, or they have no choice because they've signed non-disclosure, top secret type things. But they're anonymously telling her this because they feel a moral imperative to let this out. They talk about alleged government knowledge of the ET UFO phenomenon, about alleged government cover-up of the ET UFO phenomenon, of alleged government contact with one or more different sorts of ETs, at least since the 1940s, probably earlier. They talk about contact with one or more ETs allegedly, at least since the 1940s. For example, Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso. He wrote The Day After Roswell, which we did a while back, and from a radio interview that he made in July of 1997, so a very long time after Roswell, was the 50th anniversary of the crash. And he asked Linda Howe, "How did you get so much classified information? I mean, it's remarkable how much you know that you're not supposed to know." And because she got it from informants. And he'd been reading highly classified documents about abductions and mutilations and sightings since the early 50s. He worked for General Anthony Trudeau, the Army Research and Development Department head in the Pentagon. And his job was to filter pieces of ET technology from his office filing cabinets. He had stuff from crashed spaceships and off the bodies of ETs, mind-blowing, in his filing cabinet. And nobody in the building knew except his boss. And his job was to parcel it out to various companies in the industrial military defense contractor complex. And they were going to back engineer it, try to learn from it. And as a result of this stuff, there was a real explosion, metaphorically speaking, of technology around that time. They came out with lasers, integrated circuits, fiber optics, the accelerated particle beam, Kevlar, Velcro, and many other things. In page 267 of his book, Corso's book, he claimed that the Star Wars program was really not invented to look down on the Earth and deal with protection and security on the Earth. It was actually looking outwards to protect us from ETs, allegedly. Just let me say, I'm going to do a lot of quoting, and I'm going to throw a lot of caveats in there, and it's not because I'm expressing personal doubt. I'll always tell you when I think it's nonsense. It's because I don't want to get in trouble for misleading people with misinformation. This is all alleged. This comes from whistleblowers. This is on the same level as the hearings that they just had in Washington, where they interviewed the whistleblowers from the military, and we don't know where we stand. Let's put it that way. So by 1997, Corso no longer had inside information because, he was out of the loop at that point. He didn't think that a whole lot had changed with the process of what was going on. He knew that his boss, Trudeau, General Trudeau, not to be confused with the Canadian Prime Minister, General Trudeau thought that ETs were an existential threat. And Corso told her, there's a new world coming if we can take it, meaning if we can just stand it and participate. Corso said that no one knew all the motives of the different kinds of ETs, but the whole story, the whole narrative is a reality. They're here, no matter what the government wants to say about it, allegedly, and it doesn't matter if the media ignore all this stuff or if the media ridicule it. No matter what, it's happening. So this book, volume 2, she says, is about human testimony that's too weird to be real, but allegedly it is. In 1972, J. Allen Hynek created what he called a strangeness rating. Encounters of the first, second, and third kind. From seeing lights in the sky all the way to seeing occupants and close encounters of the fourth kind. I think the fourth kind. That's about like interaction and So he just said, this is it's a rating of how oddball these stories are. And when they first came out, they were considered absolutely just science fiction. Now there's, I think, a whole lot more public acceptance. I don't know a whole lot of people who say there's absolutely no possibility. A few older friends and neighbors who were in scientific professions just dig their heels in, don't want to talk about it. I think it's just so derisive about the whole thing. But the average person, ask people what they think. You don't have to tell them what you think. It's really interesting to hear what people say. So chapter 1 in the book is about military sources that she has. And I wrote in parentheses, these are really no longer up to date. We have a lot more knowledge. We have much more advanced technological proof, radar and such. We have video that has been taken. If you don't know what happened off the coast of San Diego with the Navy, look it up. I want to get through the book, and I didn't go back and refresh my memory about actual dates and actual names of people. But all these Navy personnel on one of these big carriers out on the Pacific off the coast of San Diego, lots of them saw, allegedly, UFOs flying from the sky into the water, back out again. Fascinating. And got them on radar. So insiders claim that there are procedures and field ops in existence to learn as much as possible about all this. It doesn't matter what they're saying to the public. It doesn't matter what the public relations office is saying. They're taking it seriously behind the scenes about intelligent life and technology. And meanwhile, they're simultaneously trying to keep the public as ignorant as possible. And what are the goals for that? Why would they do that? It's quite insulting. Why would they do that? They think that they're going to prevent panic. They think that the United States will gain technological advantage if we can keep it within our own borders. And they want to sustain the current socioeconomic religious status quo for as long as possible. They have something invested literally and figuratively, in the way things go, our economic situation, social order, and larger community beliefs about the meaning of life and existence and God. And they're afraid that people are going to lose their minds, that the stock market would crash, and that people would riot in the streets, and there'd be this existential dread, and there'd be a portion of the population who would go on looting and killing rampages. They believe all these stories that they've told themselves about people, never acknowledging the fact that humanity has known a lot about this for a very long time, despite the best interests of people like the military industrial complex trying to keep it quiet. So they're also very afraid that these ETs are going to manipulate the timeline. Some believe that they may be, some of them may be allegedly from our future, and some may be from other universes, and some may be from other dimensions, or is it all the same thing? So, some fear that genetic manipulation has gone on, and that they want to access our genes and tune into our minds and steal our souls. Depends on who you talk to, what their philosophical context is for how they run their lives, what they fear about these things. Chapter 2 looks at civilian reports and physical evidence that she didn't talk about in book 1. Chapter 3 tells Jim Sparks' story. Sparks is, let me find, okay. Sparks was an abductee and interacted with these aliens, and as we'll find out later, he's a kind of a remarkable person, because after he got over the initial shock and fear, he decided he was going to learn as much as he could, and he actually established, I don't know if I'd call it a relationship, but he established communication with these beings, and they showed him holographic images, and he was led to believe by what he was told that he was looking at his ancestors' bloodline back to a primate species, and this is what he says. He was told, the aliens made us, but we're now like parasites destroying the garden, and it has to stop or we humans are going to be stopped. The alien technologies are so advanced they could move us to another dimension in a second. They can change matter into energy and back like it's nothing. And, you know, this is all sort of related to the manifestation of the physical through thought and intention and action, as in Hermetic philosophy. And I always say this, my 2 favorite words, plasma physics. HOWE cites recent, 1994, recent for her discoveries in physics. And I wrote down, okay, you know, I skipped over some of the things she pointed out because it's already old news. So read The New Science of Heaven by Temple. And we've covered it. Go back and watch those videos. If you don't have time, you can listen to the videos when you're staining your deck. And sort of listen to that book. Listen to the synopsis of that book with the context in mind of how it fits into the larger story of alien existence and multiple dimensions. It's really interesting. Anyway, there's no such thing as mass. There's just electrical charges and energy that creates the illusion of mass. This is what he was told. This is a philosophical idea from the ancient mystery schools, and it's a scientific belief today from particle physics. Now we're getting it as a message from ETs. Very interesting. And Jacques Vallée pointed out that, he says, I believe that the UFO phenomenon is one of the ways through which an alien form of intelligence of incredible complexity is communicating with us symbolically. I believe that the UFO phenomenon represents evidence for other dimensions beyond space-time. The UFOs may not come from ordinary space, but from a multiverse which is all around us and of which we have stubbornly refused to consider the disturbing reality in spite of the evidence available to us for centuries. What we see here is not an alien invasion. It's a spiritual system that acts on humans and uses humans. That puts it in a new light. So chapter 4 is about, that was chapter 3 that we're just sort of quickly covering, introducing. Chapter 4 is about cloning and soul manipulation, shades of Dolores Cannon. And each year, HOWE says this picture becomes more complicated. It's like we kept getting titrated, a little bit more information every year. It gets more complicated to involve things like human mind control, parallel universes, and time manipulation. So some of this is not going to feel so strange to us because, as I said, the book was written in the 90s about things previous to the late 90s, and we've come a long way in the last almost 25 years. So she says, I suspect there's truth to the controversial assertion that a non-Earth intelligence interfered genetically with primate evolution on this planet. So efforts to understand the modern-day non-human presence is a challenge, inextricably bound up with the origin of our species and what seems to be the forbidden history of humankind. This quest spirals back to ancient wisdom, which long ago tried to explain who we are and why we're here by pointing to the stars. There in the gigantic cosmic theater, it was said that God made souls enter different forms to learn and grow in migrations from one reality to another. So are we talking advanced physics? Are we talking ancient philosophy? Are we talking contemporary religion? This is a fascinating, fascinating topic. And the prologue of the book, this book takes a lot of introducing. The prologue of the book quotes David Bohm, a theoretical physicist, who says mass is a phenomenon of connecting light rays which go back and forth, sort of freezing them into a pattern. So matter, as it were, is condensed or frozen light. Think vibration. Think molecules quivering, and the more they quiver, the farther apart they go. That's very simplistic, but really that is essentially what it is. The slower they are, think of an ice cube. The less energy it has, the colder it is, the icier it is, it's hard, it becomes mass. As soon as you start giving it energy, heat is energy, as soon as you start giving it energy, those molecules speed up, they vibrate faster, and what happens? They're separating from each other, they become liquid and eventually gas. And then, eventually, they break into subatomic ionized particles, streams of protons, streams of electrons, solar winds, plasma. What's going on out there? So light's not merely electromagnetic waves, but in a sense, other kind of waves that go at that speed. Therefore, all matter is a condensation of light into patterns moving back and forth at average speeds, which are less than the speed of light. Even Einstein had some hint of that idea. You could say that when we come to light, we are coming to the fundamental activity in which existence has its ground, or at least coming close to it. And what do the yogis say, the gurus of, like Paramahansa Yogananda, what do they say? That we are all the light of the source, the God source. There is light in our DNA. I think this is really fascinating. And I think that Linda Howe is coming to some of these conclusions, as you'll see as we move forward in the book. She says, my dad always said God was the breeze and the sun and cold water coming out of the hose when he washed the car. So, the machinery, let's see where I said, at 19, she says she went on a family camping trip. Her family wasn't religious. Her father was a little bit pragmatic and her mother would brush it off. And she went on this hike in Idaho in the woods, and she had missing time that ended with her seeing a pulsing light coming off of everything. When she finally realized, wait a minute, time's gone by, what the heck happened? Everything seemed to have a pulsing light around it. Flowers, trees, stars, absolutely everything around her. And she said, I heard a thought voice in my mind, so telepathic communication, that said, you are one with the light is one with you, and you are in the hands of God. This is Linda Moulton Howe this happened to. So this is why she's walked down this path. Not only because she's interested, but because she was directed very young to it. The machinery of the universe involves the evolution of the soul. So here we have finally the intersection, the Venn diagram of metaphysics and physics. Energy occurs in spiral circles, and I'll show you the picture. This is a spiral labyrinth from rocks that were found exactly like this. I don't know specifically this one, but exactly like this in England, Ireland, the Adriatic Sea area, Hopi Indian lands, Greece, and the island of Crete, all dating at least back 4,000 years before Christ. And there you go. This labyrinth is a symbolic representation of the energy spiral. So ancient wisdom is, from all these cultures, is that death is just a transition into another frequency on that spiral. Chapter 1, all this, and we're still now just starting chapter 1, military voices. This is from an anonymous retired military officer in 91. Alien technology is so advanced and the beings are so strange that no one would believe it. He says, keeping the public and the media away from what's really happening isn't difficult. It's a story no one wants to tell, that no one knows how to tell. The truth is stranger than fiction. This is from a guy that worked with them before he retired from the military. So Howe's reported on science, the environment, and phenomena related to all that stuff on the Art Bell's program Dreamland since 1993. And the word Dreamland is intentionally chosen. It's what Area 51 was called. And it's where they test and store classified technology. And it's next to or in Papoose Mountain Range. And there are rumors that within that facility, allegedly, are alien craft that are hidden. In 1995, a film was leaked of E.T. and UFO debris. Big controversy. Is this real or not? Was this manufactured film or not? April 10th of 1996, Howe and Bell and Howe, began to receive letters on this program, written to the program, from an anonymous friend in South Carolina. And the first one contained pieces of metal that the anonymous person claimed was information on Roswell from this person's grandfather, who was on the retrieval team of this crash back in the late 40s of Roswell. He claims, anonymous claims, that he was a current U.S. military top secret security person, and he couldn't talk on the record, and his grandfather, he kind of followed in his grandfather's footsteps, had the same problem, but he had pocketed some of this debris when he was clearing it up. The anonymous source claims this metal came from the UFO debris, and the incident was not an isolated incident. It was one of several, and he gave the location of it happening in the White Sands area. He says that the UFO was a wedge-shaped disc, and he gave a description. I'm not going to belabor it. We've talked about this event before. We've described it before. Wedge-shaped disc, you know, like a wedge. Oh, you can't see what I'm doing with my hands. Like a wedge, you know, like the triangle, kind of like a right triangle, but a disc. So, this letter also listed some groups that were involved in the research of the UFOs and the ETs, like the military and other types. And she includes maps, but you know, it's just maps of New Mexico and maps of White Sands. And I do want to show you that. Oh, who was involved? Okay. The University of Colorado, the Office of Naval Research, the Army Air Force, the military divisions that were there in the summer of '47, the University of California, Los Angeles, the Atomic Energy Commission, the National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics, and the Office of Scientific Research and Development. And his grandfather spent 26 weeks on the team that examined and debriefed the lone survivor of the crash. And his grandfather's role ended when that ET was sent to a long-term facility. And he was kept alive. This is not the only report that says that, allegedly. The rumor was that some kind of microwave radar from the ground accidentally interfered with the UFO technology, and created a situation where their location understanding inside the UFO was messed up by this ground microwave radar, and they missed recognizing in the UFO that there was a meteor, and they were hit by a meteor, and that's why they crashed. The metal that was studied by the scientists was composed of aluminum, but then they got another letter on their program, and the letter explained that it was part of a propulsion system. It was some kind of a conductor. The ET that they captured refused to explain the technology. He could read the minds of the interrogators. Didn't matter what language, you know, he just knew what they were thinking. They discovered accidentally, when they were back engineering this stuff, they discovered how to control the propulsion, theoretically, that it involved the need for the ET's hand and the ET's telepathic involvement. So thought and specific hand connected to the actual UFO itself to make it fly. And that there was a self-destruct function there to kind of keep the technology private. So Anonymous's grandfather believed that Westinghouse was the company that had deduced the technological information from this crash that they were able to apply to early cell phone development, fiber optics. Corso confirmed that back engineering happened by private contractors, including the Rand Corporation, allegedly. They figured out the imprint control panels. They looked like handprints, he said, at Grauman's Chinese in the cement. And when you were the right person with the exact right hand, and you, well, the right ET, and you put it into this molded hand shape in the dashboard, and you used your thoughts, you had to have the right alien hand and the right alien thoughts in order to bond, to instruct this machine. Corso said that the ET bodies were taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and when the Air Force became its own separate branch, they were sent to Norton and then Nellis Air Force Base, which is Area 51 Groom Lake. Norton Air Force Base in San Bernardino the U.S. Air Force and the CIA have an alien technology museum, and they believe, Corso believes, that it's the final resting place of at least one UFO. And this Air Force base closed in 1990s, but that doesn't mean it's closed for obvious business in the 90s, allegedly. Corso said that the government was warned that ET motives were what they were. The government knows this, and that the government's goal was to get the ET technology, to keep it out of enemy hands, Cold War, you know, and to push through American weapon development. This was their goal, and this is pretty much what they were focused on. Corso said that the government associated mutilations and abductions with the use of lasers as early as the 50s. They knew that there was some sort of weird, extremely precise, often targeting specific kinds of tissue, surgical process being used that was bloodless. So we'll talk about this more later, but they would find animals where some specific internal organ was removed without any bleeding, and with absolutely precise and microscopically precise incisions, except not externally. It would selectively cut tissue. They have no idea how they did that. And Corso says that there was evidence that this all was associated with UFO landings and ET activity. They made that association with the cattle mutilation. Corso said the government knew early on, allegedly, that ETs were powered by a pilot becoming part of the circuitry of the saucer UFO, and an extension of the ET nervous system became one with the circuitry. And it included molecular alignment of their suits and handprint controls. So this is complicated. The Air Force made a film of these panels from 1947 from the New Mexico crash. Reports of eyewitnesses, a rancher and his son in New Mexico, and a doctor who saw an Army helicopter flying over the debris field, and debris being picked up by, like, scouring the ground, military guys. They were told to leave this military zone, and the doctor thought there'd been a plane crash. He came to see if he could help any survivors, and he saw that there was a body and it wasn't human. His son saw a tent set up with a table of debris and a seat like a Ferris wheel seat with a curved top from the UFO. 2 days later, the U.S. Army came, and they had the son sign forms for his illiterate father, this is the rancher, and was told that there's nothing to see here. What you saw was a chimpanzee in an experimental plane. The dad protested. He said, no, wait a minute, I may be illiterate, but I'm not stupid. And the Army offered them hush money, and they offered them money and said, you promise us we'll give you more money if you promise that if you find anything else, any more debris lying around, you'll bring it to us. And all of these eyewitnesses are absolutely convinced that this was a gigantic cover-up. Howe heard reports of a field engineer for the U.S. Soil Conservatory, and his name was Barney Barnett. He saw the UFOs, he saw the ETs in bodysuits in the area. Now, I feel like this has sort of already been accepted by most people. Well, maybe not, but people I know. But she's publishing one of the earlier books that talks about all of this quite so frankly and brings it all together. So, this guy, Barney Barnett, saw all this happening and got real close before he, was removed by the military, because he worked for the government. And he eventually developed throat cancer, and he believes it was because he was bending over these bodies, breathing whatever. The dates and locations of all of this are too vague to verify. There's a lot of obfuscation about all of this. And this could coincide with these different stories, could all be part of the same crash. They could be different crashes. And there are Air Force reports of plane crashes, and they think that they weren't planes, that this is what they're talking about. The third anonymous letter that they got, Bell and Linda Howe, had more metal in it and claimed that it was from the outer shell of the UFO. She sent it to an independent scientific laboratory for testing, and it came back 95% manganese with zinc on the shiny side, and on the other side it was many layers of bismuth. And she says that studies indicate that this stuff may have a fractal wave pattern that resonates with a specific frequency, and that the layers were intentionally alternating layers of different the different metals. Bismuth, she believes, was because of its cooling properties. It's used in nuclear power reactors, and it resists magnetic penetration, and it has the greatest Hall effect, which she explained it, but forget about it. Just all you need to know, it's about voltage flow. It absorbs infrared energy, and it may convert heat to electricity if it's used. It is used in superconductors. She assumed that the external craft shielding was made of this, and it was to protect it going through the atmosphere. There have been samples from a UFO in Brazil in 1957 with an isotope of magnesium that doesn't exist on Earth. Howe put out a radio call for anyone who had experience with these materials who'd be willing to work with her, and she got some suggestions that it might have been used to resist or detect magnetic fields. One lab guy called, claiming that a previous study said that it came in and went out of the unknown, that studies were done where this thing just would be there and not there, there and not there. One guy agreed to do intensive searches of literature about the makeup, and he said there was nothing. This material just didn't make itself. How did it get made? He was going to do research on what industry would use this kind of material made of these things put together in this way. Industry or aeronautics or just NASA, where would we find this? Who would have made it? Nobody. Not talked about at all. No one has reported making it, and it's extremely high technological sophistication. So experiments with these metals caused all kinds of weird things, like they moved in the air when they were exposed to electromagnetic fields of some sort. They moved on their own in the air. Electrostatic fields caused it. So the question that these experimenters are asking is, are these electrogravitics? So I think what they're saying is this is all part of a larger UFO technology that allows it to move without fuel, without a battery, without any of the things that we need to get from point A to point B, that they're using anti-gravity. Corso said one UFO displaced gravity with magnetic waves. It was a repulsion force that resulted in movement. So the government knowledge and the government cover-up. Let's see here how we're doing for this chapter. I'll do a little bit more here. I don't want to make these too long each. So the function of this substance is a mystery. The source of it is a mystery. And these letters are kind of a mystery. They're suspicious. Are they really a controlled government release of information? Is this really a guy talking about his grandfather, or is this a way for the government to disclose without being responsible for disclosing? Howe has been contacted by a number of active and retired government employees, and what follows in this chapter are excerpts. They all allege government knowledge and government cover-up of ET contact and interaction with live ETs. They're very similar, she says, case to case. When you talk about things like symbology, structural details, the use of drugs and hypnosis to debrief personnel. And there's a contradiction. Is this a threat or not? Are they benevolent? Are they benign? Are they a threat? And there are those who say they're not a threat, and there are those who say that the government is involved in a secret war with aliens, allegedly. She says all this chatter reminds her of a Greek chorus, that they know more than we do, the government does, but the government doesn't know how it's going to unfold. They have a lot of facts and information. They just don't know what the end point is. And they fear that the reaction, once the public hears that we're not alone in the universe, they fear that. They fear what's going to happen. So the personnel who want to talk have to struggle with non-disclosure agreements and oaths that they took and top secret stuff. The social ridicule. A lot of these guys are hard-boiled, and they're mostly guys, hard-boiled military, hard-boiled engineers, hard-boiled scientists, and working for, corporations like Rand, and they're not given to flights of fancy, and they fear being the loss of status with their peers. And then, of course, there's the media skepticism, which feels very uniform and programmed, if you'll pardon the pun. So we get a guy, U.S. Air Force Colonel McCoy. Let me get to the page here. And he says, quote, although it's obvious that some types of flying objects have been sighted, this would be in 96, the exact nature of those objects cannot be established until physical evidence, such as that which would result from a crash, has been obtained. It's not considered advisable to present to the press information on those objects which we cannot yet identify or about which we cannot present any reasonable conclusions. That's their story. So the military is concerned with hostile threats and Cold War spies, and the eyewitness testimony reports contradict this. They're not violent, although they're taken against their free will. Before 71, there were government training manuals that actually told government personnel how to deal with UFOs and ETs and technology retrieval. They didn't even bother to hide it. And the official government policy, this training manual from 71 says, is that such creatures do not exist and that no agency of the federal government is now engaged in any study of extraterrestrials or their artifacts. Any deviation from this stated policy is absolutely forbidden. So, many documents are in the appendix of this book, and I'm not going to belabor it. I'm going to just tell you what she thinks and summarize what they say when possible, when necessary. And if you're interested, donate to Irish Granny Tarot PayPal for the book fund, and you'll get your name in the drawing for the book. Because I decided, what the heck, I'm going to raffle off the 2 volumes of Glimpses of Other Realities separately. Sorry. Okay. The book of Major Donald Kehoe, many books of his, show the evolution of the government's position. They went from open inquiry in the 50s, late 40s and 50s, to suppression, and it became dangerous and life-threatening to be a person actively pursuing this knowledge. His first book, UFOs Are Real, and the government was studying that. Later, he was frustrated with the censorship and the lies, and you can see that evolution in his books. He was surprised to be asked for his information by the Air Force, and the Air Force actually created a radio script for inside, with his help, inside the base for base personnel, confirming that UFOs were spotted and that the military was studying them. And Kehoe believed that this was a test to see how the public might react. Let's tell these guys that we've got signed up in the military, let's see how they react. And we'll move forward from there. And based on that reaction, the reaction of common soldiers and the personnel on the base, then they would decide what to do. So the script was never used. And as a matter of fact, because what happened was the military had its own radio station, and they approached Kehoe and asked him to do this script, and it was all explaining all about the UFOs and everything. And they worked with him, they liked what he did, it was all set to go, and suddenly he was told, we're not going to use it, and the radio station was on base, was completely shut down and dismantled. The silence group is the Majestic 12, MJ12, and this is a list of 12 important people, scientists, generals, government people, and the personnel assume changes because people die and retire, but the MJ12, these are the guys at the heart of the original knowledge, and they didn't want the public to know about all this high strangeness, as they call it. One government guy told Linda Howe that his superiors hoped to be dead before the public found out about the true story. They hoped they'd be dead and wouldn't have to deal with it. Some of them wanted the public to know, but they were outvoted. Corso said the ETs are not benevolent. Genetically, they're altering people, they're cloning biological entities, and they're harvesting human and biological specimens. So the interesting debate that's evolved from this statement of Corso's moving forward in time is, okay, these things are true, allegedly. These things are happening, allegedly. However, as brutal or terrifying as they seem to the human experiencers, the larger motive on the part of the ETs may actually be to prevent an existential elimination of human beings. We just don't know. So it's hard to say, is it benign, is it not? There may be several types with different motives, complex and different agenda. I'm going to stop here on this video because this chapter just goes on forever and ever. So that's the end of video number 1. And I'll be back in a second and we'll do video number 2. I hope you're enjoying this. Thank you very much. Long and Foil, and I'll be back.